In this video, I'll show you how to operate the dimmer and the illumination settings on your Pioneer DEH-S1200UB. So from any source, and we're on the AM/FM radio source right now with the in-dash receiver lit up, the quickest way to switch the dimmer on and off is to just press and hold the back button right here for a couple of seconds. If I do that, you can see that the dimmer switches on and the brightness of the in-dash receiver drops significantly. And you can switch that off again, switch the dimmer off by pressing and holding again, and this will bring the brightness back up to where you had set it previously. So there's a bunch more settings involved with the brightness and the dimmer. Let's dig into those a little bit. Again, from any source, and we're on the AM/FM radio source right now, we'll press in on the volume control, and let's roll along here until we find the illumination menu. Here's illumination, and we'll press enter. So there's two settings inside illumination. There's the brightness setting, and there's the dimmer setting. Let's start off with brightness, and this is the overall brightness of the in-dash receiver. We'll press enter here, and we have 10 levels to choose from. This is the brightest level, number 10. We can turn this back to number 5, or we can turn it back to down to number 1. That's the lowest or the dimmest setting that you have. I like a nice bright dash in my vehicle, so I'm going to turn that up to number 10 for daylight operation. Now I'm going to hit the arrow back, and we'll roll over to the next setting, which is the dimmer setting. And we'll press enter here to enter into the dimmer settings. So there's two settings here inside the dimmer setting. One is to synchronize with the clock, and this means that the dimmer can automatically switch on and off based on the time of day locally for me, or I can choose to manually switch the dimmer on and off, which is what we did over here when we pressed and held the go back button, the arrow back button here. So that's the manual setting. If you want to use that one, that's fine, that works. For me, I like to use the synchronize to the clock setting. So we'll press enter here. So here, this says we have the start time for the dimmer is 5:30 p.m. And if I press in on the volume control, I can get into the clock here and I can change that start time to say 6 p.m. for example. And we'll just change this up to 6 p.m. That means that the dimmer will switch on at 6 p.m. local time for me, given that I've set the clock correctly on the in-dash receiver. And I'll press in on the volume control again. And now start, you can see, changed to the stop time. This is when the dimmer will switch off and the radio will come back to its full brightness. And right now this says 6 a.m. So where I live right now, it doesn't get light until about 7:30 a.m. So I'm going to change that to a 7, and we'll press in on the volume control and change this to 7:30. So the dimmer is going to switch off at 7:30 a.m. for me. And I'll press in. So the dimmer switches on at about 6 p.m. or so local time. And we'll scroll through those again. And the dimmer switches off, comes back to its full brightness in the morning at about 7:30 a.m. So if that works for me, I'm going to hit the arrow back to escape. One more there. And here we are out to the AM/FM radio or in any source. So there's one more setting that we need to think about when we switch the dimmer on and off, and that's the dimmer brightness. So right now, if I press and hold this switches the dimmer on and it changes the brightness down to about level number 1. So let's go into the settings here. Here's my illumination setting and press enter. And my dimmer setting is what I want. There we go. We want the brightness setting. And right now, brightness is set to 1, but that's a little bit too dim for me. Even at nighttime, I want it to be a little brighter than that. So I'm going to bring that brightness up to 5 with the dimmer switched on. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to hit the arrow back to go back out to the AM/FM radio. Now remember, my dimmer is still switched on right now. If I press and hold the go back button, this will switch the dimmer off and it comes up to its full brightness. If I switch that dimmer on again, we can see that it dims, but it doesn't drop it all the way down. It only drops it down to level number 5. That works pretty good for me in my vehicle.